mean, that's what Paul was presumably doing. He was getting a job, maybe as a leather worker, maybe as something else, at one of these insula, and he's, they're, I don't know what people did with leather. I'm sure they weren't. Like, when I think of leather making, I think of, like, Southern people stamping the Confederate flag onto a belt buckle or something. I'm sure it wasn't like that. But, you got the Apostle Paul. He's working with this leather, and he's like, so, have you heard the news about Jesus Christ? That's presumably how he started spreading his message as he went from city. One of the cities he went to was Thessalonica. Now, note, I want to look at 205 in the textbook. If you look on 205, the right column where it says Paul's message, Paul obviously did not launch into a heavy exposition of his theology with people who were just stopping by. This was not simply because of the setting, but even more because of the nature of his typical encounter. Even though Paul was engaged in manual labor, he was not an ordinary blue-collar worker. He was highly educated, far more so than most of the people that he would meet during the workday, and his theological reflections would be enough to befuddle the average person on the street. Right? How many of you have taken philosophy with Dr. Kepler? Do you find that some of the things he says is difficult to understand? Can you imagine going to a philosophy conference, the types of things that you would hear? Ehrman's pointing out that Paul doesn't launch into his theology to people walking by at the leather shop or whatever, because it would confuse them. Moreover, most people stopping by the shop were almost certainly pagans, worshippers of Greco-Roman deities who believed that there were lots of gods, all of whom deserved devotion and cult. And by cult, they mean going down to the local temple for a particular god or goddess and sacrificing to them or burning incense to them so that they'll take care of you for whatever reason. What would Paul begin to talk about his gospel with people like this? We are, again, fortunate to have some indication in Paul's letters. The critical passage is 1, 9 through 10, where Paul reminds his recent converts what he originally taught them. To turn to God from idols, to serve a living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus who rescues us from that wrath that is coming. Right? So his message is, maybe you worship Zeus. There's a local temple to Zeus, and you go down there once a week and burn incense. Paul comes out and he's like, so, I don't think Zeus exists. In fact, I'm pretty sure that Zeus doesn't exist. But you know who does exist? The God of the Jews. You think that there are lots of gods out there? They don't exist. There's only one God, the Almighty God of the Jews. And he sent Jesus to help you out. Right? This is what Paul's telling them. All those gods and goddesses that you worship or that you know about, they don't exist. And in addition, you should turn to the message of Jesus, or the message that I'm giving you about Jesus and how he'll save you when the apocalypse comes. How many of you would be annoyed if a coworker did that to you? Some of you. Whatever Paul did, he must not have been annoying because he was super, super successful. I don't understand how, but Paul seems to have been some sort of genius because wherever he went, he actively got converts. He was extremely successful. So he must have been a really charismatic guy. He must have been like the life of the party type of character because wherever he went, he didn't annoy people, he won them over. And wherever he went, from city to city, he was able to start these churches up. I don't know how he could do that without being annoying, but apparently he did.
So he essentially spread the word through small talk?
Presumably that's how it would start. And once there was enough of a crowd, like a kind of a critical mass of people who had converted to his message, then maybe they might start meeting regularly in somebody's home. Right? I think Ehrman points out, it appears that they weren't really building churches for a couple hundred years after this point. So it's not like you would build a church. What would happen is that if you converted, then you would be like, hey, Paul, let's all meet up at my place next Saturday, and we'll talk about Jesus some more. And then they would have like weekly meetings in people's homes.